Hi everyone, this is Nim Kolkar. Welcome to Sunday Chats with Nim. Just going to wait for a bit to make sure everyone's logged in, and hopefully the audio is clear. You all know the drill. If you can't hear me for any reason, please let me know in the comments, and if all is well with the audio, please let me know that as well. All right, so we have a fun topic today, which is about some really annoying, nosy personal questions that people ask us. And very often we are at a complete loss about how to answer those nosy questions, and we end up giving away information that we later regret. So I thought that's a great topic for this Sunday afternoon, and that's what we're going to talk about. But I'm just going to wait for people to join in. Hi, Esther. Hi, Chandni. Welcome to Sunday Chats. Okay, so I've had a very interesting morning. I just finished recording an interview for my YouTube show, The Achievers Lounge, and I was interviewing the principal of Bombay Scottish School in Mumbai, India. And what was super exciting for me was that Bombay Scottish is my alma mater, so it's where I did my schooling all those years ago. So that was an added reason for my excitement to be doing that interview. So it was about a 35-minute interview that I just hopped off. So I've just finished recording and I've hopped onto Sunday Chats. So it has been a fairly busy day, and I'm really excited to be joining you all now for my weekly show. And today we are talking about smart responses to some very, very nosy questions. Let me start by saying that I'm sure you've all experienced it where someone or the other has asked you a question that somewhere crosses the line. Okay, it is not something that they really should be asking you. And in the moment, you can't think of a smart response. In the moment, you can't think of anything that does not sound rude and abrupt. And you end up saying a lot. And then on the train ride home or the bus ride home or the car ride home, you're probably berating yourself for having said too much. I'm sure you've all experienced it, right, at some point in your lives. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, because one of my pet peeves is when people ask personal questions that they should not be asking you. So that is one of my pet peeves, and I thought, let me talk about that today. I have written about that umpteen number of times, but I chose that as a topic today because I do get messages from people who tell me, especially those who do my communication skills mastery programs, one of the things that they often tell me is that, people around them, whether it's family members or distant family members, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, etc. One of the things these people tell me is that they're unable to come up with anything smart in the moment when people ask them these questions. So that's why I thought, let me cover that topic today. Hi Garima, how are you? All right, so recently I was actually asked a rather personal question by this person. And this person was just someone I know in passing, just an acquaintance. It's not like she was, a family member or a close friend or anything, but she asked me this personal question. And initially, my initial reaction was to give this detailed response. But somehow I resisted the temptation to do that. Okay, and I ended up giving her only the amount of information I felt she should know, because I firmly believe that everybody does not need to know everything. It just depends on your relationship with that person. It depends on the context, etc. There are so many factors that come into play. So I ended up giving her only the amount of information I felt she should know. Okay, and I'm glad I did, because later on when I was thinking about it, I was glad that I resisted the temptation to go into too much detail. Now, why do you think so many of us feel compelled to give the entire story when somebody asks us a personal question? One of the reasons we feel so tempted to give a lot of details is because deep down somewhere we want validation. We want to feel that the other person has correctly understood our motives. We want to justify the decisions we've made, whether it is, deciding to work full-time while your children are young, whether it's deciding to be a stay-at-home mom when your children are young, whatever the case may be. right? We want to justify those decisions. We want to explain our choices, even to people we barely know, because somewhere we want that sense of acceptance. We want people to accept us and our decisions. And therefore, this compulsion to over-explain and to give details, right? But I'd like you to resist the temptation, because I'd like you to remember that for the large part, most of the people who ask you, you are not obliged to give them a detailed explanation. So my mantra is, just because they ask does not mean you have to answer. Let me repeat that. Just because they ask does not mean you have to answer. Of course, a small number of people we are answerable to. We must give an explanation, particularly our near and dear ones, We can't rock through life just saying no one should ask me anything. There are a small number of people to whom we owe an explanation. But for the large part, people you meet at social gatherings, people you meet at dinner parties, who ask for the sake of asking, I think you should resist the temptation to give away too many details, particularly if you don't want to. Because like I've said in many of my articles, life is not a popularity contest. Okay, just because you give away information doesn't mean that person is going to like you a lot. So that's the first thing to remember. Let me just read some of the comments. Sanu says, people ask me, why don't I have children? I really don't have smart answers for this. I am watching you to learn something then. Sanu, I think one of the questions I'm going to deal with today in today's session is sort of related to that. So hopefully you'll get some tips from that. And Esther says, I always want to say mind your own business, but I cannot. And Chani says she agrees with Sanu and with Esther. And Pari says, very tempting topic. Okay, great. Yes. So in my life, I've had people ask me lots and lots of really annoying questions. And I've sort of figured out the art of putting my point across without burning bridges. But before I dive sort of into this topic, one thing I want to say is that the people who ask you personal questions, not all of them are necessarily asking from, malicious intent. They're not necessarily bad people. They're not gossip mongers necessarily, okay? A lot of people, we must realize, have no filter, and they have no clue that they have crossed a line, or that they've crossed a boundary, or that they've asked you something that they have no business asking. A lot of people have no clue that they've said anything that they shouldn't be saying. Completely clueless. Okay, that's the problem. Because there is no filter, plus there is no realization that there is no filter. Double whammy, right? Which is dangerous. So a lot of people have no clue that they've said anything wrong. So that's the first thing we must realize, that they're not bad just because they're asking. They're clueless, which is a better option, because that makes us less annoyed and less frustrated. Also, sometimes people have no clue what small talk to make when they meet you, right? They have no clue how to get a conversation started. So they blurt out the first question that comes to mind. And unfortunately, that is a nosy, personal question, which may annoy you. So they have no clue. And some people, a small section, of course, say it for malicious reasons. They say it because they're looking for a little bit of gossip. So there's all kinds of people in the world. But the most important thing to remember when answering personal questions is the idea is not to burn bridges. The idea is not to make enemies. The idea is to let the other person know in a polite but firm manner that they have crossed a certain boundary they were unaware of, and that you have absolutely no intention of answering what they are asking you. So when I sort of put up my boundaries, when people ask me personal questions, I do it in a manner that sends across a message, and it has become better with practice. So I'm not going to say that I always knew how to do it well right from the start. It takes months and months of practice, but the good news is that you become better at it. And you learn to see the humor in it, which means your body language is also lighter. You're less aggressive when you're responding. So I think it was Esther who said that there is a temptation to say MYOB, mind your own business, when people ask a personal question. But I would suggest that saying mind your own business is perhaps not a great option because you can end up offending the other person. Now, of course, the other person has been offensive to begin with by asking you a question that has crossed a line. But I would refrain from saying mind your own business, no matter how high the temptation is, because mind your own business does tend to break up ties and it does tend to burn bridges, which is not the goal here. Okay, so let me talk about the first personal question, which is my pet peeve. I have noticed that, going to weddings or going to dinner parties or going to social events, let's say person A is seeing person B after a long gap. Let's say person A bumps into person B after maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. They've not seen them in the interim. One of the most common questions that a lot of people say to others at these weddings, at these family weddings, at these dinner parties is, hey, you've put on weight. Anyone else experienced it? The first thing they say when they see you after a long time, almost as if all those years in between when you were not in touch don't amount to anything, almost as though you are not doing anything for those 8, 9 years other than putting on weight, as though there is nothing else about you or your personality that they should know. So at these weddings and how many times, have you heard this at parties? The other day, this is before the lockdown, of course, I was at some wedding and these two women sort of approached each other, and I know that this woman, let's say she is Lady X. This Lady X was super excited to see Lady Y, and she had this expression on her face where she was so overjoyed, and Lady Y greets her by saying, oh my God, you've put on so much weight. And Lady X was completely crushed because, she felt small when she heard that. She felt like a failure and she didn't know how to respond. And I was listening in. I didn't know these ladies, but I could tell that there was tension. Now, why do people begin with, you've put on weight? I want to point out today through this video that you've put on weight is not a conversation starter. You've put on weight is not a conversation starter. I have no idea why people feel the compulsion to talk about body shape. First thing that comes to mind when they see someone after a long time. And Esther says, I have exactly the opposite comment. Oh, you've lost weight. I'm always skinny. I was about to come to that, Esther. Whether it's you've put on weight or you've lost weight, it is not the ideal way to begin a conversation. And I think the more people who are aware of that, the less problems we'll have as a community at large about self-esteem. Because body shaming is a big thing. And when we ask people, oh, you've put on weight, oh, you've lost weight, it is a form of body shaming. And we need to realize that. Now, if you're meeting someone after a long time, I think an interesting way to start the conversation is, wow, we've not seen each other in 8, 9 years. What have you been up to? Because surely they were doing other stuff other than putting on weight, right? So we can think of other stuff to ask them. Now, the thing I don't understand is the person who's put on weight or lost weight or whatever the case may be, they, for the large part, probably have a mirror at home, which means they've looked at themselves, which means they are aware of it, which means they may be concerned about it, which means surely we can refrain from asking them. It's not like you're telling them something they haven't realized and suddenly it occurs to them because you told them, oh my goodness, they realize that they've put on weight. Nothing like that, right? Now, some people say, oh, they ask because they're concerned about the other person and therefore they want to know why they've lost weight or why they've put on weight. Okay, now let's say you're concerned about the other person and your relationship with them justifies asking them such a personal question, which means you need to know them fairly well or be a good enough friend, to be able to ask them that question. If you're concerned, then my suggestion is don't ask them right at the start of the conversation. Find a relevant point inside the conversation, a little bit down the track, where you can gently probe and ask this question if you absolutely must find out. If you're simply asking out of curiosity or because you can't think of anything else to ask, then refrain. But if you're concerned about the other person and you feel that you know them well enough to ask this, then resist the temptation to ask at the start and ask a little bit later. Okay, so let's say somebody has asked you, have you put on weight? Okay, one of the things, now this is a bit cheeky, but if you can say it with style, I suggest you do it, because it is funny. It always makes me laugh, and it is something I say quite often, and it does annoy the other person, but completely up to you. So let's say somebody asks you, have you put on weight? One cheeky way to reply is, oh my God, what a coincidence. I was just thinking the same about you. So let me repeat. Someone has said to you, hey, have you put on weight? And imagine you respond by saying, what a coincidence. I was just about to ask you the same thing. Have you put on weight? Now, I have asked this to people in the past, and it does make me laugh each time, because, you know, the other person is not expecting that. The other person is not expecting that response. So, you know, they are a bit taken aback. They are a bit on the back foot, and they have no clue how to respond to that. So this will take a little bit of practice. But say it with a smile and genuinely try to see the humor in the question, because when you see the humor, it will come out through your body language and it will make you seem relaxed rather than annoyed or frustrated with their question. Okay, so if they ask you, have you put on weight, throw it right back at them and say, gee, you beat me to it. I was about to ask you the same question. Smile and ask. Okay, chances are they will have no response, no smart answer to that one. Another gentler way, perhaps, not as cheeky, have you put on weight? Possibly. What about you? So if they ask you, have you put on weight? And you sort of pretend to think about it and say, possibly. What about you? Have you put on weight? Do you think? Put it right back at them. Now, of course, this depends on your relationship. If it is just someone who you barely know and you think they're just being nosy for the sake of being nosy, you can use these cheeky options. But if it is someone you know well, and if it's a friend and you feel that the person is asking with the right intentions and the right motives, then maybe you can give a more detailed answer that reflects whatever the issue may be, right? But these smart answers that I'm talking about in today's session are typically designed to offer to people who don't really know you well and who are just being nosy for the sake of being nosy. That's when you give these cheeky answers. Okay, so that is about the weight issue. Also, I want to point out the flip side of the coin. Like, let's stop asking people whether they've put on weight as a conversation starter. It is incredibly rude. It is contributing to the lack of self-esteem and self-confidence in the world. A lot of people are aware of their body shape issues. They are aware of their problems. They don't want to be reminded of it. So unless and until you know the person very well and you have a genuine reason for asking why they've put on weight, which might be related to your concern for their well-being, then by all means ask them. But if you don't know the person very well, resist the temptation to talk about weight. And it is certainly not something you would say to someone whom you're meeting after a very long time. There are plenty of other questions you can think about. And I would suggest that for those who can't think of anything else other than to say to someone they've put on weight, don't say anything. All right, so that's one. Then we come to the kids question, okay? Another one of my pet peeves, you know, when I see people who have chosen not to have a child just yet, or for whatever reason, they have, don't have children. I just don't understand what gives other people who barely know them or hardly know them the right to ask this question, because it is a deeply personal question which they have no business asking. And yet so many people have to listen to this question from complete strangers who feel it's their birthright to ask for this information. Now, let's say somebody asks you, when will you be having kids? So one option is, you just say, that's a pretty direct question. That's a pretty direct question. Then you pause. Then you smile. And then you say, so tell me, how have things been at your end? Completely talk about something entirely different. But pace it out. Okay? So let's say someone asks you, hey, when are you planning to have kids? Or are you planning to have kids? You say, that's a pretty direct question. You smile and you pause, second one, second two, second three, and then you change the topic. So how have things been at your end? Talk about something completely random and different. Two things will happen. Because of your first sentence, which is that is pretty direct question, they have realized that they have crossed a boundary. Then you pause where they're expecting you to justify, explain, defend, give an excuse, whatever the case may be. They're expecting that. So you throw them off the track completely by then asking them, so how have things been at your end? Tell me more. Trust me, this will work, because all the people who've been coached by me who are saying these questions to these nosy parkers have let them know that they have crossed a boundary. Do it with style and you'll get away with it, because they have no business asking you that question. Another way to respond to the when are you planning to have children? Another way to respond, which I really love, and I've told this to a lot of people, is I'll keep you posted as soon as I make up my mind. I'll keep you posted as soon as I make a decision. I'll keep you posted. I'll let you know as soon as I decide. So here's the question. Somebody's asked you, hey, when are you planning to have kids? And you respond, I'll let you know as soon as I've decided. What are they going to say to that? What on earth are they going to respond when you say that? Because you've already told them that you'll keep them posted when you and your partner have decided when to have children. Don't you love that? I mean, I personally love that response, and I've told that to so many of my friends who've got to face this question day in and day out. Okay? So, those are two ways to answer the kids question. The flip side is, let's say somebody already has a child or two, and then this nosy Parker person asks them whether they plan to have any more kids. I mean, how does it matter? How on earth does it matter? But yeah, still people want to know. Almost as though there's a complete dearth of topics to talk about. Almost as though there's not so much misery in the world that's happening that we can discuss, that they now want to ask the person who has a child or two whether they plan to have more kids. Are you their family member? Are you their doctor? Why do you need to know? Okay, so let's say somebody has said, any plans to have more kids? You can respond by saying, not sure. What about you? Do you have any plans to have more kids? And smile. Because if they can ask you, then surely you can ask them. So let's say you have a child and somebody is saying, oh, you've got one child. Do you plan to have another one? You can ask them, well, I'm not sure at this stage. What about you? Do you plan to have another one? And leave it at that. Any questions so far? So that's about the kids. And then another question a lot of people get asked is, how old are you? Now, let me be upfront here that personally I am someone who has no qualms about, talking about how old I am, etc., etc. But I do know, and a lot of people who don't want to tell how old they are, and rightfully so. I mean, that's their choice. Okay, so let's say somebody asks you about your age and you don't want to answer them. That's completely fine. Okay, again, we must remember that the other person is not necessarily asking because they're malicious or they're gossip mongers or whatever. Just some people are nosy. They're just curious and they want to know. Honestly, whatever your answer might be, it's not going to make a great impact on their lives, but still they want to know. Okay, and they may have reasons, they may not have reasons, but you don't want to answer them for whatever reason. And you're well within your rights not to want to answer them. So let's say somebody asks you, how old are you? And you can respond by saying, I'm not. Each year I'm only getting younger. So basically what you're saying is, I'm not old. Because they've asked you, how old are you? I'm not old. So you just say, I'm not. I'm just getting younger each year. That's one way of responding. Another thing is if someone asks you, what's your age? How old are you? So then you can say, that's for me to know and you to guess. Or you can say, that's one of my best kept secrets. That's one of my best kept secrets, and then you change the topic. Okay, and there is one last question I want to talk about, and that is, how much do you earn? I have never understood the question, and honestly, if I personally hadn't been asked that question so many times, I would have thought no one would possibly be silly enough to ask that question. But people who don't know you at all will ask you these questions. So how much do you earn? I mean, why do they need to know? Why do they need to know? How does it change their life? But they will ask because there is no filter. So let's say somebody says, how much do you earn? You can say, just enough to pay my bills. Or you can say, enough to get by. That's it. You stop them in their tracks. They have no business asking. So someone asks you, how much do you earn? You just say, just the right amount to be able to pay my bills. Smile and say it. Laugh and say it. Because they will get the message that they have crossed a boundary. Never again will you need to say, mind your own business. Never again will you need to feel tempted to tell someone to mind their own business. Because when you learn to give smart answers to nosy questions, the message does get sent in no uncertain terms that they must mind their own business. Okay, so these were the handful of questions that I felt needed to be addressed because, my clients, my friends often come to me and say, Nim, I get asked these questions even by distant family members and I have no clue how to answer them. And I really don't want to say anything rude like mind your own business because that will just sort of jeopardize the relationship. So I personally believe, I'm someone who believes that I don't owe most people an explanation. I don't owe most people a justification of my decisions or my choices. When I gave up my corporate career a few years ago to start my own business, a lot of people asked me a lot of deeply personal questions. But I was able to sort through who are those people who genuinely need an explanation from me and who are those people who don't really need to know. Okay, any of the details about why I made a particular decision. So I resisted the temptation to justify my decision to give up my corporate job and start my own business. I resisted that temptation because I was able to recognize that this particular person who is asking me really doesn't need to know. They can go back home and make up whatever they can create whatever mental picture about what I'm doing. They can come up with their own conclusion of whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong. It does not matter because, like I say, life is not a popularity contest. If I went around trying to get everyone's approval before I gave up my job and started my business, trust me, I would not be doing what I'm doing today. I would still be waiting for everyone's approval because I've always said you're not going to get everyone's approval. So why waste all that time trying to win validation from every single person? There were only one or two people whom I needed to explain why I wanted to give up my job, and my husband was the main one. If I had his support, and I did have his support, that was all that mattered. So even if there were other people who were critical of my decision, even if there were other people who spoke behind my back about what a foolish decision I had made, I did not feel the need, urge, or compulsion to explain to them why I chose to give up my corporate job. I did not feel the need to justify my decision because the person who mattered, or the people who mattered, the handful of people who mattered, understood and supported. When we look for cheerleaders, we must make sure that we are not being overambitious in trying to make everyone into a cheerleader. There are many, many, many decisions that you will have to make in life where it's impossible for you to get the approval, validation, and go ahead from every single person you know. And you will drive yourself crazy. You will make yourself miserable if you look for that validation. It ain't happening, my friend. So don't put yourself through that misery. Okay, let's quickly read what Garima has to say. Garima says, it happened with me and my husband in India. Someone asked how much you both earn and we gave the answer, just enough to pay our bills. But he again asked that, but I want to know the amount in Indian currency. He was of my father's age and my father's friend. I was completely clueless how to handle. So yeah, when someone sort of elderly will ask me, I'll say, uncle, ye main discuss karna pasand nahi karti hu. Malahi discuss karala avdat nahi. ये थोड़ा सा पर्सनल है. Just leave it at that. Personally, Garima, I find that it all boils down to body language. It all boils down to body language. It is whether or not we've said it with a smile. Sometimes you just have to look a little apologetic, but still say exactly what you want to say. ये थोड़ा पर्सनल है. इस पे मुझे बात नहीं करना. मुझे इस पे बात करना पसंद नहीं है. But it's the look of being slightly apologetic, understanding that you're trying not to be rude, and in deference to their age, because you respect them, you don't want to sound rude. So all that body language sums up. In fact, I find that some of the statements that I make to people are incredibly firm. They are incredibly to the point, but because I'm sort of saying it with a smile and slightly apologetic and stuff like that, you end up not necessarily offending the other person. And also I feel, and this is for everyone, that I want to say that also in life you must decide that if the opposite person gets offended, you must decide whether you're going to spend sleepless nights because of that. Because surely not every relationship in the world should give you sleepless nights if for whatever reason that relationship does not work out because you chose not to answer a question that you felt the other person really didn't need to ask. Okay, so in our minds, we must know that if the worst case scenario, let's say this person takes offense because you don't want to give a certain piece of information, you must know in your mind whether it matters so much to you if that person decides that they are offended. Because me personally, because I sort of have so many goals that I'm working towards and so many things that I would like to achieve, I would drive myself crazy if I had a wide circle of people whose approval mattered to me. So to be honest and absolutely brutally frank, there are very, very, very few people in this universe whose validation matters to me. And because there are such few people whose validation matters, I'm able to achieve the things I want to achieve. Because let's say I offend some people because of certain decisions or choices I've made, I just look at it as part of the game, that's just something that happens. And if I started spending sleepless nights worrying about person A's approval, person B's validation, person 3's understanding, blah, 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 do you think I would get any book written? Do you think I would be even having the time to do Sunday chats with you? No, I'd be sitting there wondering and scratching my head and thinking, how do I get this person's approval? How do I get them to understand why I gave up my job? How do I get them to understand why I chose to do X, Y, Z? Okay, and Kale says, relatives always wanted to know when I will have a kid after being married for 8 years. I'll smile and say tonight. Oh, I love that, Kale. Tonight. And then they will look shocked and drift to another topic. I love that. That's a good one. So next time someone says, when are you going to have a child, you can say tonight, like Kale said. I love that. That is great. I love it. So yes, so that is pretty much it for today. I just thought I will cover this topic. I want you all to remember that in life, most of the people who ask you personal questions, you really don't owe them an explanation. And for the same question, you can decide that if person A and person B asks you the same question, based on your relationship, based on your history with them, you can decide person A, I'm going to give details 1, 2, and 3. And person B, I'm only going to give them detail 1. The same question, depending on who asks you, you can decide how much you want to reveal. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Let's say my husband asks me a certain question. Of course, I'm going to give him a little bit more information than if some passing acquaintance whom I barely know or whom I met just once asks me. And if a complete stranger asks me, I will probably not tell them anything. So it depends on the context. It depends on the relationship. It depends on the history of that relationship. Okay? And Padma says, I come into this situation with my neighbors who want to know whatever we do, any alterations to our house, they see it, they know we are doing it, but still ask us. I just smile and say, yes. Is this the right way? Absolutely, Padma. If you just smile and give minimal information, sometimes, to me, that is the smartest answer possible. I actually also changed the topic entirely. I say, yeah, interesting question. Not something I want to answer today. So anyway, how are things at your end? That's what I would do. Smiling is important. Positive body language is very important. and letting the other person know that you've understood the question but have no intentions of answering it. That's one of the smartest things you can do. Sometimes people ask me, oh, Nim, what if I pretend that I haven't understood the question? If I pretend not to have understood the question, will that give them the hint that I don't want to answer that? And I'm saying, no. If you pretend that you've not understood the question, the other person can be so persistent that they will try to figure out a way for you to understand that question. And then you are backed into a corner and you absolutely have to answer, because they will keep asking you until you figure it out. So always my trick is to let them know that you've understood exactly what they're trying to ask, but you have absolutely no intention of answering them, because you don't owe most people an explanation. Okay, so hopefully you've enjoyed today's session, and hopefully I've equipped you with a few smart answers, and you can actually mix and match those answers anyway. For a large part, whatever answers I've given you today, you can use them in all kinds of different situations. Just remember to say it with a smile, say it with positive body language, say it with confidence, because that will convey the right message. Alrighty, so that's it for today. I'm off to have some coffee and maybe a cookie, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Oh yes, that reminds me, yesterday when I did my How to Write Fiction workshop on Facebook, and those of you who missed it, please go to my page and see it. It's a 1-hour workshop on how to write fiction. So if you're an aspiring writer, you will enjoy that session. At the end of that session, I actually talked about my creative writing program for kids that's beginning next Monday. So there are different sessions in the week, and the program goes on for 3 sessions. So whichever program you choose, there will be 3 1-hour sessions for 3 weeks, right? So a few people told me, and thank you for flagging it to me, that there were some technical glitches on my website, because of which they were not able to complete the booking, etc., etc., etc. I've taken note of your emails, and my team is currently working back end of the website, and it should be up and running in a few hours. So it should hopefully be smooth run from there on. But thank you for letting me know, and we are fixing it, and you will be able to book a spot for your child in my creative writing programs. So you have a few different options. There are programs for the 5 to 8 year olds, and then there are programs for 9 and above. It should all be fixed in the next few hours. Alrighty. And Esther says, thank you for sharing smart answers. You're very welcome, Esther. And Garima says, I love today's session. Thank you so much. You're very welcome, Garima. I'm so glad you all enjoyed. And take care. Have a fabulous week ahead. And make sure you give smart answers to nosy questions. Bye for now.